Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Graham Stewart, and I'll be moderating this virtual town hall. I'd like to welcome everyone for joining us this afternoon through Zoom or watching us on the live webcast. So just want to put out a few housekeeping items before we get started. I want to thank everyone who submitted a question in advance. We'll be sort of working those questions in throughout the session. It won't surprise you to know that there was a fair amount of overlap. So where possible, we'll try to bundle up questions so we can get through more during the time we have allotted. There are a few different ways to ask questions live during the session itself. So you have the option of using the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on Zoom. If you're on YouTube, or if you don't want to use the Q&A function, you can use our dedicated email address, which is conversations@yorku.ca. That's conversations@yorku.ca. In a few minutes, I'll put it up on my screen here. And the link is also on the webcast website. So if you're watching it on the York site, you'll have access to that link as well. And our moderating team will be sort of, as questions are submitted, a few folks will have the opportunity to ask their questions live using their microphone during the session. So you'll be notified if you're one of those folks, and you'll be patched through into the session. So there's almost certainly going to be more questions than we have time to answer. So anything we do not get to this afternoon will be forwarded to the appropriate department or person for a direct follow-up. And just like to remind everyone that it would help us out a lot if you take the time on the conversations.info.yorku.ca website that there's a link there for a survey that you can fill out after the event has concluded. And that just allows us to improve the experience for everyone as we go forward and do more of these sessions in the future. So with that, I would like to hand it over to President Lenton to get us started.
Thank you very much, Graham. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour, bonjour. Really want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I do want to start with the land acknowledgement. As this town hall is virtual and we're not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that the land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. And I ask, if that is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. So I just want to start by welcoming Amir Asif, and I think this is his first official virtual or other town hall that he's been on, our new Vice President of Research and Innovation. Hello, Amir. And I want to begin by congratulating all of you for completing the 2019-20 academic year and also successfully beginning the summer term amidst this global pandemic. If you are a student, I want to thank you for your dedication to your academic work, for your flexibility, and for your perseverance as we move courses to online and remote formats. And thank you also to the committed and innovative faculty and staff who have really made the transition to teaching and learning in online and providing services online as easy as possible. So a little before I get started with today's events, I do want to take a moment to just comment on the current situation that we see happening in the United States and in Canada. Like many of you, I have followed the news surrounding the tragic death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and really the conversations that have been sparked from that about ongoing systemic anti-Black racism in the United States and across the world, including both here in Toronto and Canada. I want to acknowledge the deep pain and frustration that members of the Black community feel. At York, we are committed to using our role as an institution of higher education to holding society and ourselves accountable to learning and growing, including by listening to and learning from Black voices. We want to build a safer, more equitable world. Please know that we are committed to ensuring that all our community members feel safe and welcome. And there are campus clubs, organizations, resources, and services that are available for you. Please visit yorku.ca/rights, as well as yorku.ca/mental health for any information that may be valuable for you. I also want to talk for a moment about the cyber attack that we experienced here at York and provide you with a bit of an update since May when it happened. Fortunately, this attack was very quickly identified by UIT staff, and they immediately took steps to mitigate both the scope and also the potential severity of the attack by shutting down York's computer systems. And they then started to engage in an with external forensic experts on how to investigate the situation thoroughly and understand what had been infected and how to best mitigate. UIT, and I really want to thank them for this, they worked around the clock to bring our systems back online, and we are now totally recovered. The situation could have been much worse, and it really speaks to the cybersecurity steps that we have taken as an institution to try to be able to prevent and mitigate and respond so quickly. While the investigation itself is still ongoing, it does not appear that any personal information was compromised. And in particular, I want to thank our Chief Information Officer, Donnell and Perciel, and the entire UIT team for their dedication and the marathon work over the past month. So for fall, we've received a lot of questions about fall, understandably, because now that summer has launched, people are anxious to know what fall is going to look like. And we really want to use the town hall today to ensure that the entire community has the opportunity to ask questions and hopefully to provide you with the answers that you need. I know that fall is really top of mind for all of us. As you will have read in our last community update, the fall term will be offered predominantly online and into remote formats. We will be doing our best to offer small in-person activities where possible and as permitted by public health authorities and government. In particular, we want to ensure that we can proceed with all of our programs, and so want to give priority to in-person where it is needed for hands-on learning, labs, studios, clinical placements. We are also looking at conducting a few pilots of reopening over the summer. Because we're committed to offering our full selection of academic programming, it's been a huge endeavor, incredible efforts by our entire community, because we're all committed to ensuring that York continues to offer and maintain the same high quality that we always do in our teaching and learning. We are very fortunate to have such dedicated course directors, full-time faculty instructors, all who have been developing quite creative ways of thinking about how they can offer their courses online and through virtual formats, including alternative ways of introducing experiential education virtually. And I want to thank you very much for that. Just an example that people might want to know about in terms of how we're actually combining our commitment to experiential education with helping the community is the Shop Here program. It was launched by the City of Toronto, and what it involves in the first tranche was 50 Schulich students who are working directly with local retailers to help them move their businesses online. We also have a detailed plan that outlines our phased and gradual approach to reopening our research labs. We know that there have been many faculty and especially graduate students who have been keen to have the labs reopened, and we expect that to happen in the coming weeks. Every decision and action that we are taking is guided by advice from public health, and it is based on a commitment to the health and safety of our entire community. We will continue to provide regular updates throughout the summer as we make additional decisions and initiate plans. I know that we are all eager to have access to in-person instruction, to our labs, our studios, our offices, our research and creative activities, and frankly, just to be able to interact and see each other. But I do want to say that what has been accomplished in these difficult, exceptional circumstances over the past 11 weeks is truly extraordinary, and I want to thank all of you. Regarding some resources, as a reminder, I do want to mention that there are services, there are resources that are in place to support you, both your mental and your physical health, alongside of your academic and professional success. I was very proud of the response to the York University COVID-19 Student Relief Fund, where many of our community members donated to support our emergency bursaries. Through this program, many of our students were helped with unexpected housing, rent, food, travel, and other costs due to the pandemic. The Teaching Commons is also continuing to provide a whole host of resources and guidance to help faculty and instructional staff innovate and adapt to the remote learning needs of our students. Among many initiatives, Libraries has created a new globally accessible COVID-19 research guide, which offers researchers both inside and outside the university recommendations on sources to consider when researching COVID-19. You can always find a list of those resources, services, and the latest updates at coronavirus.info.yorku.ca. So those are my opening remarks. And just before we go to questions, I'm joined today by a host of colleagues who are all here and who will have expertise and knowledge about different questions. I'm going to ask them to each briefly introduce themselves, starting with the Provost and Vice President Academic, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Phillips, Provost and Vice President Academic. Glad to be here.
Amir.
Hi, everyone. This is Amir Asif, Vice President Research and Innovation. Looking forward to meeting you in person, but looking forward to your questions today.
Sheila.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sheila Cote-Meek, and I'm the Vice President, Equity, People, and Culture.
Carol.
Hi, everyone. It's Carol McCauley, Vice President, Finance and Administration.
Jeff.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff O'Hagan. I serve as Vice President Advancement. I'm pleased to be here with all of you today.
And Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Fromowitz. I'm Vice Provost Students, and it's great to be here today.
So back to you, Graham.
All right, so we'll go to, well, perhaps the best way to start the session today. I know over the past few weeks and in previous sessions, we've had a lot of questions from graduate students regarding things like term extensions and you know, how they're going to respond to the disruption in their programs with being off campus. So maybe just to throw it directly to the Provost, Lisa Phillips, first to just sort of talk about, I know there was a message that went out today, and maybe to explain a little bit about what was in there.
Thank you very much, Graham, and thanks to everyone who's been asking these questions, because they've really helped us to look into all the different situations of graduate students, and which has been a fairly complex exercise, but I think that we have landed with some answers finally. And so I encourage everyone to check out the coronavirus.info.yorku.ca website for the communication that came out just today, June 1st. If you click on the Students tab, there's actually a sub-tab for graduate students, and you'll find it right there. And the communication really explained the way that we have extended deadlines for things like thesis defense and paper submission for students who are finishing. We've extended the normal 30-day tuition-free grace period to 60 days for both the winter and the summer. We've also done continuing to work hard with supervisors and students to, wherever possible, find alternate ways for them to complete their research plans while we cannot do in-person work on campus, certainly, or off campus for that matter. And to also encourage anyone for whom going on a leave might be the best solution right now until we can get back to in-person research, to do so. We've also, as was mentioned, started to look at how we can get people back into labs and studios. Even the libraries are starting to look at how they could make hard copy materials available, whether through a scanning service or through a curbside pickup starting sometime later this month. Because, of course, as much as the libraries have managed to make a wider array of materials available in digital form, there remain some materials like archival materials, for instance, that researchers need to access in hard copy. We've also accepted and acknowledged in this communication that there will be some students for whom it's not very easy to figure out an alternate way to conduct their research or a way to catch up their research, even if they can get into the lab or the studio or the library materials later this summer. And that for some students, we are going to need to extend their program length. So especially for those who are close to completion, who really don't have very much time to sort of catch up and get back on the normal time schedule, we've created a petitions process by which students, when they're entering what should have been the last term of their program, can apply for a one-term extension. We will be we'll be extending their term if that petition is granted on a part-time status basis with no tuition and no fees. And we will be looking for different ways of supporting them financially through research assistantships, through various forms of external funding that we have available to us. And where there are no alternate sources of funding, we will be providing for some form of bursary for those students. So I'm hoping that this communication will address the myriad different situations that graduate students find themselves in. And I encourage all graduate students who are concerned about these issues to go and have a look at that communication and look into the details.
Okay, thank you very much. So go to a question, it was actually several questions that we received, which looks at the fall, and given that it will be primarily online and remote, but the President's comments will be looking to restore some in-person activities where possible. So as people gradually return to campus, what sort of safety, health and safety measures will be put in place as people begin to return?
So I'm just going to start very quickly by saying that we've been working with the entire Council of Ontario Universities and with our own emergency operations group to very carefully agree on and to share information on a common set of guidelines that will be used by all universities to ensure campus safety and the health of our community members. We're still in progress of working out some of the details in terms of those guidelines, but first and foremost, and I'm going to ask both Amir and Carol to comment on this, but first and foremost, I think that the major expectation is social distancing as a guideline, as a principle. But then understanding that there will be certain circumstances where social distancing might not be possible, and then what kinds of provisions need to go in place of when social distancing cannot be maintained. But we've been working out some of those details when it comes to the reopening of some of the research labs, and Carol's been supporting EOC on the broader plan. So maybe I'll turn it over to Amir to talk about the research pilot reopening, and then Carol.
Thank you, Rhonda. The complete information on research opening is available on the research website, research.info.yorku.ca-news-events. So basically, in terms of research opening, we are emphasizing that all research activities that can be conducted on campus all research activity that can be conducted at home, away from campus, should still be conducted from home. Those activities which either require specialized infrastructure or involves graduate students close to their graduation, only a phased approach would be used to bring a small number of researchers back on campus. And when we bring those researchers back on campus, we'll ensure the proper social distances is maintained, all safety recommendations that have been made by the provincial government, all those recommendations are met, and we are working with various university services to ensure that that happens, which includes PPEs, as well as ensuring that social distances is maintained within the research labs on the campus community. And we will not allow researchers to return on campus until and unless we are sure that all health recommendations passed by the provincial government are maintained, and at the same time the campus is a safe place for them to come. Again, I want to emphasize it will be a very, very small number, and we will ensure that health and safety standards are kept.
Carol?
So I could just, sure, I'll just add a bit to it in terms of the planning where we are underway for people returning to campus. As both Rhonda and Amir have referenced, physical distancing is still a primary way of avoiding the transmission of the disease. That frequent hand washing, use of alcohol-based hand sanitizer if hand washing is not an option. And so there will be certainly, we're looking at our supplies of hand sanitizer to make sure it's available. There'll be a number of signs that are in the process of being printed now to give individuals who are accessing facilities on campus a protocol, whether it be an elevator or washrooms or just moving around campus paths of travel. We're working on decals for the floors to indicate distances for physical distancing, as well as plexiglass shields for those areas where that amount of 2 meters of distance is not possible. So I would like to say that I'm really quite happy, thrilled indeed that a lot of these things are being printed on campus by our own staff. So I think that that's really terrific. We're able to do both all plexiglass and signs and decals ourselves, and they're well underway and will be available for the reopening of some labs, as Amir has just referenced. But it's also important to keep in mind that at this point, the province has not reopened the university to be able to have for broad participation. And so many of our spaces remain locked, closed and locked, and will remain that way until we're permitted to come back onto campus and with more people.
All right, thanks very much. So we've had a number of questions, and there was a communication that went out from the university on this on Friday, but just providing some clarity around the working from home expectations. So folks are asking if it is correct that they will not be required to return to campus before September.
So what we've said, and we recently signed on to a request by the City of Toronto to try to maintain our current arrangements until September, are that all but required services will continue to be managed from home. However, over the summer, as you've just heard, we are going to be running a few pilots, and we are going to be in stages, slowly starting to open up some research labs. And so for those required services, there may be staff that, in addition to faculty and graduate students, who may be needed in order to make that possible for us to have that very limited number of required services. We've already had some staff who have been on campus throughout the entire period of time when it comes to security and our residences. So it's a range of required services, and some of those required services will expand slightly as we do start to have some of these phased reopening. And so then we would have conversations.
Nous envisageons ici une réouverture progressive.
We're hearing the French translator right now. I'm not sure why that's happening, but just wanted to let you know that we can hear you. So, but we would obviously be working very closely with any staff who we would be needing to return back to campus. And by far, the majority of staff will not be returning onto our campuses until September.
All right, thank you. So I had a question in, how do you anticipate that student clubs will be affected if on-campus student activity is severely restricted?
Lucy, maybe you could take that.
I'd be pleased to. And I'm going to use this moment to also not only welcome our students, but welcome our brand new students who may have just been accepting our offers, and you might be anywhere around the world. So for our new students, you may know that there are hundreds of clubs. There's our student governments, and there are hundreds of clubs that are engaged in activities. We are working with those clubs to help them also move their services online. Our clubs connect students to community in many ways, in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's interests that are political, sometimes it's interests that are based on the subject matter. So they will be continuing to do their work. Your college governments, student governments, will be continuing to provide services, as will both our undergraduate student union and our graduate student union. And they'll be updating us, and we'll be working with them throughout the summer on the variety of programs. You'll meet many of them during the orientation period for those of you who are new, and they'll be introducing themselves that way. And others, our continuing students, will meet many of their student organizations as they introduce themselves through a variety of communications that will be coordinated either through the division, through the faculty, through the college, or through the student organizations.
Thank you, Lucy.
Great, thanks very much. So a question here, concerns have been raised specifically at Glendon about the state of our ventilation and overall HVAC infrastructure and the risk of propagation of viruses through closed circuit recycled air. Can you talk about the work being done to ensure that our buildings will be safe?
Can I ask you to take that, Carol?
Sure. With respect to the ventilation systems, and I can't speak specifically to Glendon, but I know that we'll be doing cleaning of ventilation systems and testing of air once we start to recommission buildings, as they start to be reopened. When they have been closed down, of course, the ventilation system is affected while we're doing that. They're normally balanced to have a number of people in the buildings, and that certainly has changed as the buildings have been closed. So that will be one part of our testing, our recommissioning of HVAC systems for reopening. Indeed, we did a very thorough cleaning and disinfecting of all spaces before they were locked, and that will happen again once they're ready to be reopened. They'll be reopened, re-cleaned, and re-disinfected. So those are some of the steps we're taking in addition to the others I talked about earlier about how we move through campus.
Great. So question from a faculty member. They sort of start off that back in the 90s, that we were approaching a time when a good portion of York employees were reaching retirement age, and we were approaching an era of budget cuts. The pension fund was in good shape, and this allowed people to be able to retire early with either a reduced penalty or no penalty at all. So the question is, will there be an economic incentive to allow those who are planning on retiring in the next 5 to 8 years to be able to retire early?
So I think we need to separate out whether or not we're talking about faculty or staff. Just maybe I'll ask the provost to talk about the faculty plan that we have launched.
Sure, there actually is a retirement incentive program that has been launched that is a matter for discussion between each dean or principal and a particular faculty member. And the criteria really relate to those faculty who are within 5 years of reaching normal retirement date or past normal retirement date, who are also within a year of reaching their next sabbatical entitlement, and accelerating that and providing some more attractive terms for sabbatical followed by retirement. So it is a limited program at the moment, and we are allowing colleagues some time to absorb that, colleagues who might be eligible, and to raise questions about it and to express their interest or not in that. So that is rolling out this month, and the deadline, I think, for expressions of interest has been extended until June 22nd, and that's how we're proceeding to this point.
And I don't know whether or not Sheila wants to add anything from the staff side. I'll just say that we are currently looking at all possible options of what we can do. We have laid out various scenarios of what our situation could be. We've sort of narrowed it down now to a kind of a most probable scenario. And then even a slightly more optimistic scenario to give us a bit of a range. And we are estimating the potential loss in revenue that could be associated with that, and then starting to look at different actions that the university could take in order to address the gap between that loss of our revenue and our current expenditures. We are obviously motivated, like everyone, to do everything we can to minimize any negative impact on our community. So ideas like the one that's just mentioned about seeing if we could roll out a more comprehensive retirement initiative for our staff as well as our faculty, definitely looking at that. We don't currently have a proposal in mind for that, but we've got to really put everything on the table. Because in worst case, well, not worst case necessarily, in one of the scenarios that we're looking at, the university over the next 3 years, could be seeing a reduction in our revenue somewhere in the vicinity of $170 million. And that's obviously significant for us, especially given that universities just faced a cut in tuition revenue in 1920 of 10%, and tuition is frozen this year. So when you pile on these potential risks for the university, we have to be in the position of being able to take actions if we have to. But again, trying to look at what are some of the options that we could undertake that would minimize the impact on our staff and our faculty. I don't know, Sheila, if you wanted to add anything to those plans or.
I think you've covered most of it. We are working at exploring all options, of course, and doing some analysis around that at the moment. So I think you've covered it, though.
All right, so we have a question from an international student, which says that many international students have been concerned about the issue of tuition fees. Has there been a serious consideration of a reduction of international tuition to account for the fact that classes will be facilitated virtually, both for new incoming students and current international students?
The provost want to take that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I want to just underline one more time, I know others have, that we will absolutely be providing our full course offerings. We will absolutely be providing a quality experience with our remote teaching that we're known for, and that instructors are working quite hard actually to multiply the number of ways that students will be engaged and have opportunities to learn remotely. However, we do recognize that for many of our international students, there are additional financial barriers that have been created by the coronavirus pandemic and impact on family situations. And we are providing a special international student financial award for both summer students and for those students continuing or entering in the fall. to offset some of their tuition costs, and recognize that this is a very particular exceptional time for many. And many international students don't have access to some of the public financial aid that the governments in Canada have put out for domestic students. So the summer award amount is $1,000, the fall award amount is $2,000, and we really are very much hoping that that is going to address some of these concerns. I want to emphasize that it's only part of what we're doing for international students. There are a whole range of supports and advice that are available to you remotely. I encourage you to contact, to look at the websites for York International, to talk to your advisor about other ways that your learning can be supported regardless of your personal circumstances.
All right, staying with students for a moment here. Could you give an update on the opening on residences for students who wish to live on campus this fall? Will that be a possibility? If so, will the restaurants be open to students?
Lucy, do you want to start? And then maybe we'll see if Carol has anything to add.
I'd be pleased to, thank you. Our residences will be open for fall. We are in fact sending out all of the residence offers today and tomorrow, and some perhaps Wednesday at the latest. Our residences will be at less than 50% capacity to ensure a number of safety concerns. One, there will only be one student per room, so no double rooms. And secondly, we are setting aside several hundred rooms to ensure that in the event, if there is any illnesses, we can support students who need to self-isolate in a helpful way and ensure that they have a full service suite and food delivered to them. And the food, Carol, you may want to jump in, but the food services are working hand in hand with the residence and housing office to make sure that the meal plans are aware and planned for the numbers of students. We expect to have about, in the undergraduate residences, about 1,000 of our students, where we normally have closer to about 2,500 in the undergraduate York student residences.
Carol?
Sure. On food, as members of the community know, at least on the Keele campus, we have a number of food providers. Aramark provides our dining hall programs, our meal plans, as well as operates other units on campus. There are food outlets in the student center, both student centers in York Lanes and in the Quad. So those that are directly in relationship with the university, which is Aramark, we're working directly with them. Our food service group is working with them to talk about what sorts of food plan will be available to students. The residence plan has just recently been firmed up. So now knowing the numbers of the students who may be in residence, we're able to work with Aramark, who's our primary provider, to design the meal plans that will be available for those students. Expect to be responsive to the need to continue physical distancing, as is the case, as Lucy mentioned, but at the same time, make sure that people have adequate and appropriate and good food available to them. Also, with our other partners in the Quad, in York Lanes and Student Center, we're continuing our conversations with those groups to make sure that we understand what other outlets will be open, and so what other foods options will be available, not only to resident students, but also to other members of the community who may be on campus, such as research folks.
Okay, thank you. So next question, how is York ensuring academic honesty with the online and remote learning courses?
Lisa?
Yes, thanks. We do understand that some instructors will want to use proctored online exam services for their courses. Many instructors are coming up with alternative forms of evaluation using Moodle and so forth, but for some courses, they will want the proctoring, and so we have entered a contract with ProctorU. ProctorU. There's a proctoring company that we've entered a contract with that will be providing services to the entire university, and that should be, that information should be available to you in various forms very soon. But rest assured, there will be the ability to offer those kinds of services if that's your preference. The only requirement that we are making is that instructors include on their course syllabus from the very start of the course that they will be using those online proctoring services to administer an exam. Not all students are comfortable using that kind of a service, and so we want students to have full disclosure so that they can choose, if that's not acceptable to them, that they would not take that course.
Could I just take a moment to also add, I think it's really important for the students that are listening in, that every course will also indicate whether or not there is any hands-on in-person requirement that would have them coming to the campuses. And they'll know that before the course begins. As I've said, there'll be very few. The majority of our fall courses will be online, but we also want students to be well aware if there's an expectation that they're going to be on campus, or if there's any alternative for them to be able to perform those requirements of the course.
Okay. So under the new normal in the post-COVID-19 pandemic, do you anticipate more courses being offered on a hybrid basis? And if so, will we be investing more in our computer services, including hardware and software?
You know, I want to say that we've been tracking student surveys throughout and talking to our university partners as well. And, you know, the students, for the most part, really value the in-person activities. Colleagues value the in-person activities. And so I believe that there's really a very high interest in the future, whenever that will be exactly, to resume a good amount of our in-person course instruction. However, if you look at any one of our university academic plans, at least for the last 10 years or more, pedagogical innovation, looking for ways that we can really enhance the student learning experience through technology, as well as experiential education, have been priorities. We know that students learn very different ways. Many of our courses now have a Moodle site, even if they're in person, if not all. And so I would hope that given the significant investment that we have made in this innovation in online and remote instruction, the creativity that our faculty members, our course directors have been developing in terms of making sure that students do have that same high quality learning experience, that they've got opportunities to interact with one another, to chat with one another, you know, a huge range of technological enhancements, that we would capture some of that. Even if there's an in-person version of a course, faculty members might maintain their online version. If we see well out into the future, for winter, maybe even for next year, that there are students, especially our international students, where there still might be travel restrictions, if we can continue to make it possible for them to progress by thinking very carefully about how we can best schedule a really good combination in-person as well as online and remote, I would anticipate that our academic units would want to do that. And a question that was asked in the chat was about winter. When we talk about fall, does that mean just the first term, or does that mean the winter term? You know, we're obviously hoping that by winter there'll be a vaccine, and we will be able to have a higher comfort level in opening up more in person. But there's a lot of uncertainty, you know, in the future about whether or not how the pandemic will behave. And right now we're taking one term at a time, but we really want to be sure that we continue to take full advantage of the investment that we've been making in online and remote instruction. So I anticipate going out to the future that we will continue to see a combination of in-person, online, maybe a marrying together of using in-person increasingly for hands-on, problem-based kinds of activities, and posting lectures to the extent that colleagues wish to do that online. Yes, Lucy.
If I could also add that in the student service realm, what we're finding, although we very much want to get back to in-person. Through the online programs and services, we're able to expand and extend our services. So, for example, counseling. We would like to continue in this new normal to continue to offer, in addition to the in-person, the remote counseling, because it meets the needs of our students who are busy during the day and would rather meet with a counselor at a different time, and it suits the counselor's needs according to their schedules. And we're learning with, for example, orientation, creating opportunities to engage with our students from around the world remotely in advance of them coming to campus can enhance the service. So we're quite excited from some of the learning we've had in delivering remote services, and we want to incorporate that into our in-person services when we do return.
Lisa.
Yes, I want to just say as well that I think we're learning an awful lot right now. I think that people are doing things they haven't done before. They're innovating. They're being incredibly creative about different ways that they can engage with, evaluate, deliver material, have students involved in hands-on work, in projects, in working with each other. I think there's just, it's an immense period of creativity. I know it has its challenges and its stresses, but our faculty are rising to the occasion in such a tremendous way. Our Teaching Commons is putting on a wonderful programming to help support and stimulate all this activity as well. And I think that we're starting to hear feedback from students, from faculty members about what the experience is, what some of the advantages are, what some of the limitations are. York has always prided itself on access being a tremendously important value and something that we work hard to constantly expand access. And this is going to provide us with a new way to expand access for certain students. At the same time, it's also revealing the value of some of the in-person activities that we do, and the fact that there's so much that goes on both within and beyond teaching spaces that people are very anxious to recapture. So I think that there's going to be some tremendous learnings and really, really interesting new ways of doing things that come out of this. And the future is not easy to predict, but I don't think it's going to look exactly the same as it has, as the past has.
Great, thank you. So we're actually going to go to a live question right now. So Barbara has joined us in the feed. So Barbara, if you unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask a question.
Right, thank you very much. This refers back really to the President and the Provost's earlier remarks, but my question is that if we plan our courses to be held online and announce to students accordingly in either the fall or winter terms, and we get permission suddenly or otherwise from the provincial government and the university that we can hold classes in person, what would the steps be to pivot these courses back to face? I'm referring in particular to small studio courses, particularly in AMPD or in labs in the science faculties. And I'm wondering if there's language that you will be developing that we can use to inform students of this eventuality. Because I know you're asking us to give students information at the beginning of courses about what our plans are for online and in person. So I'm really just wondering if you could give some clarity in the case of these instances where we can go back to face-to-face. Thank you.
So let me start, and maybe the Provost wants to add. You know, we've been guided, and Senate Executive has also, when we've been discussing these matters with them, we've really been guided by those core principles that we always use with any kind of disruption about, you know, academic integrity, but fairness to students and timely information. And so we realized that we really had to make a firm decision about what was going to happen with fall. We could not keep on going, especially given that students will be starting to register in courses just really in a week. But also our faculty members needed security. We were getting needed clarity. We were getting an increasing number of requests from faculty members. The people just wanted to know. So we made the decision that given, and this was based on a huge amount of data, what other universities were doing, what the student survey was telling us, the behavior of the pandemic, consultation with public health. Like, we took all that information into consideration and made the determination that the majority of our classes will need to be online. Then we undertook a process by which people who felt that their course really required an in-person, because there was an essential, and you can imagine with science labs, with arts and media performance and design studios, as you've mentioned, there are sometimes components of courses that really cannot be done, at least certainly cannot be done well online. And so faculty members were asked to fill out a form indicating that if there were some small classes that could be accommodated, if, for example, the government were willing to say that groups of under 20 or under 35 or so could come onto campus, would you want to be one of those courses? We got all that information. We're now aligning that information by our capacity. Do we have enough rooms, enough classrooms that are large enough to maintain the 6 feet of social distancing required based on the class size? And each of those instructors will be told, they will be informed about whether or not we can accommodate their class. So everyone will know and be able to put that on their course outline. If there were some major change in August and the government said, actually, we're going to let groups of 100 come together, we are not going to scramble and start trying to change everything, because it would create too much chaos for the faculty members who have invested all that time in preparing for one model. It would also create too much chaos for students who had signed up for a course only to find out that now everything was changing. So we'll stay with the approvals and with the structure for the fall term. For the winter, that is still a potential that we could potentially have more courses accommodated in the winter. And there's also the situation of full courses, so a fall-winter course. And the instructor might say, well, okay, I'll do all fall online, but if in winter things open up, if there's a vaccine, I might want to pivot and do my winter course or term in person. So we'll be working very closely, and the provost might want to elaborate on this, because we'll be worried, of course, that there'll be students who will have signed up for the course in fall, expecting that they were going to be able to finish the course online. So we would be wanting to be careful that the student was able to complete the course online, even if there were some possibilities of adding in some more in-person activities in the winter. But I'm going to turn it over to the provost to just elaborate on that process.
I think actually the president has covered all the essential material, but maybe I'll just reiterate a couple of things. We've really decided we need to take a term-by-term approach. We need to, when we get to the point where we need to give people some ability to plan for the next term, then we need to make some decisions about what's the most sensible approach with the information we have at that point. And then those plans need to sort of stay in place, because students are making plans based on where in the world they're located and whether they are able to move or not. Faculty are making plans for their courses. And so we can't have upheaval after we sort of set the approach for each term. So for fall, we've said, if you look at those fall planning principles that the Senate Executive Committee approved, we've said that normally if a student begins a class remotely, they can expect that they'll be able to finish it remotely. And that's why we're working hard right now to confirm if there's any courses for which that's not the case, for which a student would be required to do some in-person component, because they need to know that at the point of registration in that course, so they can decide whether it's possible or not for them to do that. The other feature of the fall planning principles, you'll know, is that instructors are being asked to come up with plans that if there's an optional in-person component, what's the alternative for the student who can't be on campus, who can't participate in that, or chooses not to for health reasons or for whatever reasons right now. And so there has to be some alternative way to complete the student learning outcomes despite not being able to do those optional in-person components. So once your course syllabus is set for the fall, there should not be any pivoting after that, really. You should have all the information you need at this point to plan your fall and count on that fall then being delivered as you've planned it. We're not quite at the point where we have to make a decision about winter. However, I am hearing increasing questions about winter. And so we will be turning our minds to that, getting as much information in hand as we possibly can to make as informed a decision as possible, but not waiting so long that no one is able to plan for their winter term. I think those were the main points that I wanted to cover. Maybe I'll just say on those, for those courses where instructors have said, look, to complete the learning requirements of this course, there really is an in-person requirement that cannot be waived, that is necessary. We've now looked at all of those requests, and we're just in the sort of final analysis, but we're optimistic that for those where it's most critical, we will be able to accommodate with appropriate social distancing or personal protective equipment and safety procedures, that we will be able to accommodate those courses where there's a required in-person component. And we'll be letting instructors know about that quite soon. So just want to thank you for the question, Barbara. I think you're capturing something that's on a lot of people's minds. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to address it.
Great, thank you. So we've had a few questions regarding daycare and childcare, and specifically if we were to find ourselves in a position where there was some limited return to campus and folks we were expanding that definition of required staff and faculty, and the daycares had not yet been permitted to open, how would we manage that as an institution for people facing those responsibilities?
Well, let me start off, first of all, by saying that we very much appreciate that everyone has different family situations right now. In the first instance, we would be working toward trying to maintain as much flexibility as possible, flex hours where possible, to try to accommodate how families were adjusting their own plans to manage, performing the required work or their course lectures or whatever it might be. There is a family accommodation policy. Sheila, can I ask you to talk about that briefly, please?
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda. The family accommodation policy is found on the Center for Human Rights, Equity and Inclusion website, and it does outline a process for those members who or employees who are experiencing issues with caring for small children, maybe elderly parents, etc. But it's a fairly well-defined process. I would just urge people who have issues to in the first instance, to talk to their manager and or their academic supervisor to identify what their concerns are, what their issues are, so that as much flexibility can be put in place in terms of coming back to work. But then the alternate would be to go through the family accommodation policy. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. So we're going to go to another live question. We have Susan joining us in the feed. Susan, go ahead.
Hi, my question actually is with respect to what Lisa said earlier about the proctoring of exams. And I just wanted to seek some clarity. I'd heard that proctoring for exams was only going to be available for those exams that required some form of accreditation or professional association requirements. So I just wanted clarity on that it's not for all exams, it's for very specific exams.
Thanks, Susan. I will ask Lucy to confirm, but my understanding is that's not the case, that it really is in terms of the instructor's determination as to whether a proctored online exam is needed in their course. They have the option of asking for that. Lucy, do you have any different information from that?
No, it's exactly as you said, Lisa.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. So just to, we've had the question asked a few different ways by a few different people, but it might be best to just ask the panel if they could address the possibility of layoffs as the university goes forward and grapples with its new financial reality.
So, you know, there's no doubt at all that we're going to undertake all possibilities, all actions that we can to avoid layoffs. I mean, I said earlier that our goal is to identify the actions that we could take and then try to, when we actually see how things are evolving, try to obviously start with actions that would have minimum or the smallest amount of impact on our existing community. Because you know, we are together really wanting to try to ensure that we're doing everything we can by our entire community. We're also deferring a lot of our actions. So even if we're identifying possible actions, and I really appreciate that even starting to talk about possible actions creates a great deal of anxiety amongst people, because when you start to talk about what you might have to do, people obviously are going to get worried that we are going to have to do it. But our approach with the board and our planning is to try to have the conversations, figure out what would be possible, but to defer it until we get closer to actually figuring out how accurate our scenarios are. We're planning for a scenario, but over the summer, we're going to be getting increasing information. June 1st, which was today, was the deadline for confirmations. About by the end of July, students will have signed up for courses, so we'll have a good idea about what the course load of our students are. And so by getting into August, we'll have a much better idea of what the challenges are that we're facing. At the moment, I have to say that everything is on the table, because if we do find ourselves in the position of a longer period of time where we have people who are unable to do their work from home, and it goes on, and we can't, an initial response that we're looking at for those people is there some possible redeployment that could be done? So do we need people in other areas of the university that have similar kinds of skill sets or transferable skill sets? So again, we're endeavoring to do everything that we can. But if we end up in that situation of 170 million over 3 years, if we can't somehow true up that loss in our revenue with bringing down our expenditures, even if we try to, streamline all of our costs, then we'll have to start potentially looking at other broader actions across the university. I know that some other universities have already begun to talk about a wage freeze. Some universities have been talking about layoffs. We are really trying our best to defer those kinds of actions. And in the meantime, starting to have conversations with our employee groups. So starting to meet with union executives and other employee groups just to lay out what some of the options are should we not be able to somehow manage to close that gap, as I've said, between the loss of revenue and our expenditures. But we are certainly hoping to be able to avoid most of those more severe types of solutions, and we're doing everything we can to mitigate the loss of enrollment. I really believe we're going to have a very high quality learning experience. Students are going to have ways to engage with one another from wherever they are in the world. And so we're investing in all of those efforts, and our colleagues are investing in all of those efforts precisely in part to ensure our students' success, that our students can stay in their programs. And if we do all of that really well, putting our students first, hopefully we actually end up mitigating that loss of enrollment, and we can manage to find ways that are a little bit more which have less of a negative impact on our colleagues to see our way through this. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to comment. Sheila.
Thank you, Rhonda. I just wanted to add a couple of things. We're in addition to the redeployment piece that you spoke about, where employees might be underutilized in one area and they could pick up work in another area. But in addition to that, we've put a pause on all non-essential hires, which I think is an important strategy as well going forward. And as well, we've asked employees to start utilizing any accrued vacation in an effort to not only that people need breaks, especially during this particularly stressful time, but also so that we don't accrue huge expectations for payouts of vacation time. So I just wanted to add those two things. Thank you, Rhonda.
Lisa.
Yeah, I thought I would just add that we are normally at this time of the year, we're looking to start a hiring process for faculty, which is a very critical part of our strategic plan, is to renew our faculty complement. This year, it will be a very restricted call to begin with. We're really putting a pause on most of our faculty hiring until we have a better sense of our enrollments and our budget capacity, so that we can leave options open for ourselves and not tie ourselves into additional compensation costs before we know the situation a little better. So again, just another way to try to avoid some of the worst possible outcomes if we should find ourselves in a situation where the budget is under duress.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I think we all heard that everything sort of remains on the table, but just in the interest of total transparency, we did receive the question, what measures would the senior administration be applying to themselves in the case of a financial contingency?
Yeah, we're anticipating that the years that we're looking at, which will be the challenging years, will be 2021. We actually had a very good 2019-20 year. We finished the year ahead of what was expected, and that's incredibly fortunate because that's helping us to mitigate somewhat the impact for the next 3 years. Other universities had a difficult 19-20 year, so they're going into the pandemic years with a very challenging financial picture. So fortunately for us, all the efforts that we make all the time of really putting York in as good a situation as we could be in approaching this pandemic. But for sure, for the 3 years of the big impact, the next 3 years, starting with next year, if there are going to be any impact whatsoever on having a conversation, for example, if there's going to be any impact on wages, it would have to start with the senior administration. So the senior administration is not going to ask anyone else to consider a wage freeze or never mind layoffs without us first voluntarily taking some position on our own compensation. So as I said, everything is on the table right now. And when we know more for the 2021 year about what we're going to have to do, it starts with us.
Great, thanks very much. So just on the question of returning to campus, we have a few different questions here looking at different pieces, so I might just ask them both at the same time. So one is, will masks be provided to students if they are returning to campus? And has there been any consideration of mandatory COVID-19 testing for people who will be returning to campus?
Carol, I'm wondering if you want to maybe take that initially. And
about masks, there's of course a distinction between the PPE, so the personal protective equipment, and those things that are required for people who either using non-surgical masks or using shields and that sort of thing. To the extent that we have to deal with service delivery, we will be providing things like the shields in front of spaces where students or faculty or staff are being served. With respect to non-surgical masks, so just regular masks, we've been investigating that. I know some universities are looking at providing them, others are not. Certainly the medical officer of health now is suggesting that double layers of cotton masks are recommended when people are out. I think that at this stage, what we know is that that would logically be something that we might recommend, particularly when physical distancing isn't possible. Whether the university will be providing them or not, I think that's something we're investigating right now. I'm not sure that we've landed.
I could just add that we are in conversations with the other universities in Ontario and with government and public health about, what the requirements will be. There's a lot of view that in most cases, you will not need the PPE, sort of any kind of mask would suffice. And so once we get more information from them, and also what capacity there is for ordering supplies, we'll be able to provide more information as part of our reopening. There's a lot of different options, and for cloth masks, and also cloth masks where you can put in one of the surgical masks as a liner, and it kind of has more longevity, but we don't know all what is going to be required yet. And I think that the approach that the government is recommending is that in the first instance, we really do what we can to maintain the social distancing. And that might also include plexiglass for frontline, staff who are dealing with a lot of questions from students, for example, so that we don't immediately go to thinking that the mask is somehow, even the best option. In certain circumstances, it's not necessarily the best option. Maintaining that social distancing, the plexiglass, the screens, these might actually, might want to put as much of that in place as necessary before you turn to the masks. Around the temperature, I'm sorry, Carol, did you apply to that? I don't think we're currently intending to take people's temperatures at buildings before they're allowed.
Right. No, and I think the question was about requiring vaccinations, and we have not turned our attention to that, nor temperatures. I know that those are all being considered, and as you've said, President, that there's trying to get some coordination among institutions in the province, but those two items we've not finalized a decision on, either temperature or vaccines. Vaccines are not yet available, but when they are, I've seen a couple of questions in the chat about whether we'll be requiring them, and we certainly haven't landed on that yet.
I guess I want to say in the first instance that we really ask people to be responsible, and that if they have a temperature or they're not feeling well or they have any respiratory symptoms of any kind, that they don't come in. And so whether or not we find that it's necessary to take these additional steps, that's a big question around, people's individual rights, and, also sort of taking the step that people are not going to be responsible and stay home. Now, I do appreciate that sometimes people don't know that they're unwell. They have very minor symptoms. So it's not always possible. And so therefore, it seems to me that if you combine people who voluntarily stay home when they're not well with taking the social distancing steps as a precaution for people who don't know that they're not well, that they might have COVID-19, that this to me is perhaps the better combination that we might want to contemplate going forward. If there was some particular reason that we felt that we needed to take that additional step, or that was advice that was coming from public health authorities around, whether or not it was temperature taking or how we're managing vaccinations and so forth, we'll be doing that in consultation with public health authorities.
Okay, thanks very much. So we have another live question. Sabine has joined us in the feed. Sabine, please go ahead.
Yes, hello. First of all, thank you for all the work. This is utterly stressful, I have to say. So we'll all just have to deal with it. My question is, I had several students who didn't have internet access or access to a computer. And I'm wondering, since we don't have the classes, whether there can be study spaces somehow made available for them with proper sanitation and whatnot. I have about 10 deferrals, I think, or 12. And I don't know how they are. I don't know how they're doing. If they knew they could go to York University or Glendon campus in my case and study there and have internet access, I think some of them may actually be very interested. I don't know how many there will be, but that's maybe something to research and find out.
I think that's a really good comment. As you know, if it was simply a matter of a laptop, we did have a laptop loan program that students or faculty could borrow. But the internet, that's a bit more complicated of an issue. I do believe that we actually even had some sticks at one point, but I think that's a really, if students, for whatever reason, have not been able to get a laptop or they've not been able to get a stick, they should maybe look into those options too. They're still available. But if that's not a solution, what you're suggesting, making some, perhaps like book by appointment space that students could come onto campus with proper cleaning in between, that's a reasonable suggestion, and we'll certainly take it back to the emergency operations group. I also have the provost who wants to comment on this. Lisa?
Yes, thanks for the question, Sabina. This is weighing heavily on our minds, and one of the questions we've been asking students as they apply for residence space is whether their living situation is conducive to academic study. And if they don't have a living situation conducive to academic study, for whatever reason, including, for instance, lack of access to internet, lack of access to study space, that we would try to prioritize them for our limited residence spaces for that very reason, so that they can have access. But I think that the point you're raising about even some students who might have a living situation they don't want to change, but maybe just by having access to certain study spaces on campus could have their access really transformed, I think is another thing to aim for as we look at gradual reopening of spaces. So thanks for the question.
Oh, Lucy, go ahead, Lucy.
And my apologies, it's not directly to address Sabine's question, but I have been corrected by my staff who know more than I do on some of these issues. So I want to clarify the question asked by a previous in a live question about the exams. And I stand corrected. Preference for the proctor exams is being given to those courses that require it for accreditation or professional association. So I misspoke, and I just wanted to correct it before we ended.
So Lucy, even if it's the case that preference is being given, and I understand why, if it's a requirement of the program, why you would need to give preference to those courses that required it for accreditation of professional associations. Is it possible that it's still the case that if we have capacity and then a faculty member makes a compelling argument for why he or she really feels that a proctored exam is crucial, that we may still be able to accommodate that professor or not? We
would work with the provost to make that determination. And again, any course that has a proctored exam requirement has to note that on their courses before students enroll, and students will be enrolling in about a week.
Thank you, Lucy.
Okay, thank you very much. We're getting towards the end of things now, but I'm hoping we can fit in a couple more questions before we wrap. So again, this is two different lines of questioning that ended up in the same place. One from someone in nursing and someone from our AMPD faculty, asking about, going back to that idea that some small in-person activities would be allowed, and we'll be looking to do that where possible. So what would that look like for a nursing student, or say a theater or a dance student? How are we going to facilitate, on the one hand, those clinical experiences, but also on the other, studio-based programs?
Does the provost want to take a go at that?
I apologize. I wonder if the question could be repeated. I was still on proctoring.
What's it going to look like, Lisa, for those courses that do get permission, authority to do in person, the small, like for nursing, clinical, or for studio? Do we know what that's going to look like yet?
Well, funny that nursing should be mentioned, and I did see that come up in the chat, because in fact, that's one of the areas that has where a number of courses are going to require some kind of access to the nursing simulation suite, for instance, in order to go forward in the fall and to be completed. It really will depend on the individual course and the individual activities that are needed. If people are able to keep 6 feet apart from each other, you know, from the entire time they're going into the space to being in the space to leaving the space, that's one question, and that's one way of handling it. But in some cases, they won't be able to keep that distance, because the very nature of the hands-on activities they're doing require close proximity. If you're learning to give an intravenous, you know, you can't do that from 6 feet away, for instance. And so that will require then attention to personal protective equipment, and absolutely ensuring that people are not going to be exposed to, to virus. So it really is going to depend on the specific situation. It's going to require the advice of public health authorities and us to make detailed plans about exactly how individuals engaging in the activity can do that safely. And if they can't, then it's not going to be possible to carry out the activity. But as I mentioned earlier, we are optimistic that we can find solutions for every single course where it's being identified as required.
Great, thank you. So we'll try to get one last question in here. One of the attendees was asking what efforts are being made to advocate for financial support from the provincial government as we respond to the pandemic.
Financial support, well, it's a broad question. So of course, the federal government up until now has taken on the predominant responsibility for rolling out programs nationally, especially including the $9 billion program to support students. Given that the federal government has rolled out these programs, now provincial governments are looking to see what they can do to fill gaps. And certainly the Council of Ontario Universities, the presidents, we have gotten together to analyze ourselves what are the gaps that are left by what the federal government has done, and what would be incredibly helpful for this province to do. And in some cases, the province would have to match some programs. Like if there was an infrastructure financial support, the province might have to match. And so we've really looked at all the gaps. We've looked at OSAP and what the government could do around student loan program. So yes, we do advocate regularly. And when we advocate, we talk about 3 main areas that we've all agreed on, that we want the government to focus on. One is investing in students, so supporting students. That's the top priority, to please look at what the federal government has done and what could you be doing to complement what the federal government has done. The second request is to help us with online investment. So this is, although universities, of course, have been invested in this type of pedagogical innovation for some time, ramping up at this speed requires significant investment in online education. And the third request was stabilizing the sector. So we've said, look, if we're going to end up losing across Ontario, across Canada, this amount of money, there's very little that's more important than health and higher education in being able to respond to this pandemic and to ensure early recovery for Canada. And that it is going to be incredibly important for them to help us stabilize this loss of revenue, because there's no way we could make actions easily, take actions easily that quickly that would have us make up that potential loss of revenue. So we've been continuing to advocate for those three sources. At the moment, they've not been incredibly forthcoming with where they're going to land on supporting higher education. They have taken a few actions around OSAP. They have also deferred the implementation of the Strategic Mandate Agreement 3, which had the risk of lost revenue if you didn't meet certain metrics, because obviously in this kind of system, in this context, the normal metrics are going to be impacted. But that's really all they've done so far, and we continue to advocate, but we're not sure exactly what more they are going to do, unless one of my colleagues is aware of something else I'm not aware of right now. But that advocacy continues. Yes, Lisa?
I'm sorry, I was hoping to return briefly to the subject of proctored exams, but I don't want to get in the way if there's others who want to comment on.
No,
So,
hands. Go ahead, Lisa.
I think we need to put out some clarifying information, some more details, since there's interest in this topic. But one thing I did just want to clarify is that course outlines typically are prepared for the start of a course, not several months in advance for enrollment. So if you're an instructor who would like to have a final exam that's proctored, I don't want anyone to panic that they have to decide that in the next week before course enrollment starts, or arrange that. It should be possible to provide a course outline later, closer to the start of the course, and identify that your final exam will be proctored. My understanding is that we will be accommodating that. For some courses where the accrediting body requires more extensive proctoring, we would make the service available for to whatever extent is required to meet the accreditation requirements. But for any course, for a final exam, if instructors choose to have a proctored online final exam, we should be able to accommodate that. So I think we will be putting out some information to clarify in writing, but I wanted to just try to add a little bit there before we finish the town hall.
Okay, thanks very much. Before we finish, I just want to remind everyone that there is a survey to complete, and that information allows us to improve these sessions and to make it more valuable for the folks joining us. So if you're in Zoom, you will get a pop-up reminder to ask you to complete the poll. That'll happen at the end. And if you're watching on the live stream on the York website, there's a link to the survey there as well. So we would very much appreciate if you take the time to help us improve this for future meetings. So I turn it back over to the president for some closing remarks.
Yeah, it's very hard not to want to try to answer all the remaining questions that are in that chat feed. And I feel really bad that we can't answer all of them. We do make a commitment to answer your questions. Look, I do want to say, a number of questions have come up about, how you actually manage programs where actual touching is involved. An example was given with dancing, where you actually have to lift someone. And so I want to just say generally that we are very much committed to trying to get the value of online remote so that we don't have to, so that we can minimize the challenges of trying to bring too many people back to campus. And we can really focus then on creating the space on campus when it's absolutely necessary, but also trying to make sure that those programs where you do need that up close contact, that we somehow find ways to accommodate that. At the end of the day, the instructors are going to be the ones with their students who are in the best position to figure out what can this look like? Is it a matter that we could actually manage with sufficient personal protective equipment that we could do some of these hands-on activities? Is it possible to change the nature of the assessment so you can still do a solo piece? I appreciate that it's hard, you can't really kind of lift somebody in a solo piece, so I understand that there are limits. But I think that the instructors are going to have to imagine all those different pieces. It is possible, but there could be some components that people want to put off a bit later. In some cases, people might say, look, let's leave this course or even these components until winter. Maybe there'll be a vaccine by December or January. So I think that all of our instructors are going to be trying to come up with creative solutions to the best of their ability to alter, to shift, to use PPE so that we minimize the number of students who sort of have to wait until winter or sometime at least later on in the fall. We'll be taking advantage of all of those. I just want you to know that we are committed to the success of our students. It's a very challenging period of time, but we know how important higher education is to recovery, to future skills, to your success. We want to support our faculty and we want to support our students. I know that there are a number of QP2, there are a number of graduate students who are waiting to find out about courses and about TAs. We certainly intend to try to offer as robust a selection of courses as possible. We certainly expect to have virtual tutorials. Again, we're motivated to try to minimize to the extent possible the negative impact on our colleagues. So I want to thank everyone very much for calling in. And if we haven't answered your question, we'll endeavor to do so and hopefully hold another town hall in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to my colleagues for joining me as well.